Good morning, Access Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this holiday weekend. I hope it's been a great weekend for you. I hope you're able to have some fun and enjoy family and just being together. I know that you were enjoying the fireworks last night because I heard them all, and it is such a fantastic time to celebrate all the ways that God has been good to us through this incredible country that we get to live in. And we're so grateful that you would tune in on a Sunday morning to be part of this experience together, because even though we can't be together physically, it is really cool to come together and be here at the same time and reflect on all that God has given us and all the ways that He has demonstrated His love for us. And we're going to sing about that today. And then Gavin Adams is kicking off a new series today, and I'm so excited about this series. Gavin and I have been friends for a long time, and when Kevin and I first previewed this content, we were so excited to share it with you because I think Gavin has really tapped into something that is going on for so many of us during this COVID season where we have experienced loss. And Gavin's going to talk to us a little bit about how to unpack and address that loss and how to handle that in really positive ways and how to let God use that in our lives. And so these next 3 weeks are just going to be so helpful and so practical for what we're going through right now. And even if you feel like you're not grieving right now, I think you're going to find that this really applies to you and is helpful for you. So thank you so much for being a part of us. We're excited to share this together and to watch this together. And I don't know where you are today and what you're doing, if you're by yourself, if you're watching on your phone, or if you've gathered your whole family together into the living room. But we would encourage you to just even sing along with us. I know that's weird, and we've all tried this over the last couple of months with this new online season. But I think if you're in a place where you can feel comfortable singing, I would encourage you to just sing as we say these truths together and remind ourselves of these truths. Before we get started, I want you to say hi in the chat. So if you are on your phone or a device where you can chat, say hi in the chat. We'd love to know who's here. Samuel is with us this morning, and Samuel is going to be leading us today with some great songs that were recorded in the backyard. I think they've got a cool feel to them, and it is so great to have you with us today, Samuel. Thanks for joining us. And we want to know, how was your 4th? What have you been doing? Have you been doing any traveling? Have you taken any vacations? Where have you guys been so far? And where are you going? Maybe you've got a vacation that is yet ahead of you before the back to school season or the back to schooling season, whatever this season is that we're headed to. Good morning, Bakers. So glad to have you. Donna Hughes, thank you for joining us. You guys, thank you for saying hi in the chat. That makes me feel so much better. Just to know that I am not by myself out here, but that we are doing this together. And guys, I want you to know that we are excitedly, but cautiously, if we can be all of that at the same time, excitedly and cautiously planning for getting back together in person. And we hope you can join us. We hope you will join us. We really want to pull that off. We're planning to do that around the time that school starts again. We'll let you know more specifics as we get closer. Because we are watching what's going on in the news. We're watching the number of cases that are in our area locally. We want to do the right thing and the wise thing, the safe thing. But at the same time, we just think that it is healthy for us to be together as a church. And so we're trying really hard to strike that balance. And we're working on scheduling our volunteers right now. If you are not currently serving at Access Church and you would be open to that, we would love to have you join our teams. In fact, Kevin is putting together a new team, and this is really important because we recognize that in the beginning, we will probably have more people watching online than will join us in person. And so that's okay, because if you're not feeling well, we want you to stay home. If you're not comfortable joining us in person for whatever reason, we want you to stay home. But we want to try to create a good online experience, and we've never broadcasted our services live from Liberty Pines before. So that'll be a whole new thing for us. And we need some new volunteers to help make that happen, to run cameras and to run switchers and to run audio. And if you don't know how to do that stuff, that's great. We will teach you. We just need some folks that are willing to show up and make themselves available on Sunday mornings. So that's what we're shooting for. We'd love to have your help in those areas and in kids ministry and other areas as well. And before we start this morning, I do want to say thank you so much for your continued generosity toward Access Church. Y'all have not taken your foot off the gas at all during this COVID season, and that has empowered us to be so generous toward our community. We've been able to be generous toward people who are out of work, who've experienced loss of income. We've been able to be generous to local businesses. We have made a commitment to build a house with Habitat for Humanity, so we got to send them a really nice check a few weeks ago. And we have the dates on the calendar now, and so we'll be announcing those soon. But in September, we will have build days. We've got 3 Fridays and 2 Saturdays where we're going to be going to build a home here in St. Johns County. We're partnering with a couple of other churches to make this possible, to build a house for a family in need. And that is because of your generosity that we can do that. And we're also planning to be really generous here in the next couple of weeks to one of our favorite organizations, 6-8 Ministries. And as you know, 6-8 does some incredible work in Costa Rica. We have loved partnering with them over the last, 8 or 10 years. I think maybe close to 10 years that we've been partnering with 6-8 Ministries. And we send teams down there. It's always the highlight of our year. But because of travel restrictions, our team was not able to go this year, nor was any other team. So no teams were able to join 6-8 this year, and that has affected them both in terms of all of that lost volunteer labor, but also the money that they receive from the teams. When we go down there, we always give them a gift to help with projects. And so we want to give them an extra special gift, and we're going to do that here in the next couple of weeks with Spencer, who is their executive director. And we're able to do that and to demonstrate that kind of generosity because you have been so faithful in giving back to God through Access Church from all that God has given you. And I just want to say thank you so much for being generous. And thank you for enabling us to be generous to individuals and organizations who need to feel the generosity and the love of the body of Christ during this season. And you have impacted so many people, and we've gotten so many notes from people who've said thank you so much for being generous to our family during a time when their income was down and when they're underemployed or unemployed. And so thank you very much for being generous. It really does mean so much. Well, we're about to enjoy some music from our band and this message from Gavin. And guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that this encourages you, and I hope this is the best part of your weekend. Thank you so much for joining us.
You love for me, it's not complacent, it's always chasing, it won't abandon. Jesus, your love for me, not disappointing, won't leave me wanting, no, it's overwhelming. Jesus, your love for me, I know I need it, I know it's worth it, the cross it proves it. Jesus, your love for me, your love is the real thing, it's the real thing, it's the air I breathe. Your love has got a hold on me, and it's holding me, it is everything. Your love is the real thing, it's the real thing, it's the air I breathe. Your love has got a hold on me, and it's holding me, it is everything, it's the real thing. Your love is the real thing, it's the real thing, it's the air I breathe, it's the real thing.
Hey, Woodstock City. I'm standing here on the stage at our church, and it's a little weird because you're not here. Sunday is by far my favorite day of the week, and Sunday morning especially. Now, I know I get paid to be here, but I love being here, and part of why I love being here is because you are usually here with me. I love roaming through the halls and seeing you and your families, so much energy, so much excitement to be back at Woodstock City. And then, of course, we get in here into the auditorium and we sing together, and it's so much fun. But Matt, as you kind of move the camera back, everybody can see there's just something really missing. And what's missing is you. It just feels weird to be in here without you. It feels like, well, it actually feels like a loss. Loss is really important. I want us to spend a couple of sessions talking about loss. Loss is one of those things that really has the ability to affect us, but we often don't know how deep-reaching the effect can be. I know that because I've experienced a couple of losses that I didn't know what to do with, and I'm gonna tell you about them. I'm gonna tell you about one of them, and you're gonna hear it and you're gonna think, what's the big deal? And that's kind of the point. For us to really understand loss, I wanna go back to when I was 15 years old. I don't know what you were doing at 15. I was a sophomore in high school. I had just shown up at a brand new school. In ninth grade, after that year, that summer, our family moved school districts, and I showed up at a new school. Now, the previous year in ninth grade, I made the JV basketball team. I loved basketball. It was by far my favorite sport. And in ninth grade, I went to a basketball school. I mean, that's what they specialized in. In fact, they didn't really have other sports. They had football, basketball, but basketball was the sport. Multiple county championships, even a few state championships. We had some future NBA players on our high school varsity team. And as a ninth grader, I made the JV team. So when we moved over that summer and I showed up in 10th grade to this new school, it definitely wasn't a basketball school. It was more of a golf and tennis kind of school. So I felt pretty confident as a sophomore, as a 10th grader, about making that JV basketball team. I loved basketball so much. And so when tryouts came out, I was the very first one to sign up. If I remember, I showed up that first night. I didn't really know anybody. I didn't know the coach, but as much as I loved it and as much as I had been playing it and knowing I had made the team last year at the real good basketball school, I wasn't overly worried. So tryouts began. If you've ever tried out for basketball, maybe other sports do this too, you don't even really get a ball out the first few nights. We just ran and we ran and we ran, and I felt like I did pretty good. Most of the people vomited at some point. I never did. Felt good about it. I was in relatively good shape. By night 3, we started actually getting the basketballs out and starting having some scrimmages. I'll never forget, halfway through that third night, we were shooting three-pointers. There was this one guy on the team. He was a senior on the varsity team. He was really good. And we were shooting three-pointers, and we both were shooting together, and we made 10 three-pointers in a row. I remember because a crowd even started gathering to watch us. It was like the new kid against the real good varsity player. And so the day that cuts were announced, I was pretty excited. I was nervous, but I was pretty excited. I showed up that morning to school, got there early. The roster for the team was posted on the coach's, door of his office. So I kind of walked into the gym early that day, went straight to his office, looked at the door, and there was the roster, and my name was on that roster. And I felt so good about that. Later that day, though, we all kind of caught word that the coach wanted to have a little bit more tryout. He wasn't completely satisfied with the way the team had kind of come together, maybe the makeup of the team. And so we were gonna have one more night of tryouts. Well, coming off of the three-point thing and all the other things that had been going, I don't know, I just felt pretty good about it. And so that next night, we showed up. It didn't go so well, though. That last night of tryouts, I remember so much about it. It's so vivid. I can take you to the exact spot in the gym where I dribbled the ball off my foot on a fast break. I can take you to the exact moment in that gym where somebody threw a pass to me, but I wasn't looking, and it hit me in the arm. I remember so much about that night. I went home after tryouts again, and I didn't feel nearly as confident. I still was very hopeful. I got to school really early that next day. I walked straight into the gym, went to the coach's office, looked on his roster sheet, and I read all the names. And then I read the names again, and my name wasn't on it. I knocked on his door, and he was in the room, Coach Flynn. I said, "Hey, Coach Flynn, can I talk to you?" And he already knew about what. And I said, "Hey, I felt like things had gone really well. I had one bad night, but come on, it's a bad night." And he says to me, "Gavin, I get it, but you're new to the school, and all of the other athletes I just know so much better. They've grown up in the rec league. I've watched them last year, and I just felt like I had to go with the people who I knew." I can't even begin to describe how angry that made me. I was so upset. As a 15-year-old, I stormed out of his office. I went to homeroom. My friends in homeroom were like, "What's going on?" I couldn't even talk about it. I was so angry. My mom and dad suggested I just sign up for the rec league that year and play rec basketball, and that's what I did. I averaged that year in rec ball 27.5 points a game. I remember exactly the number, 27.5 points a game. At the end of every single game, the opposing coach would walk up to me and he would say, "Gavin, why are you not playing for the school?" And every single time I looked back and said, "I don't know, you should ask the coach." I was so upset, so frustrated. I decided in that rec league year that I would never, ever, ever allow that to happen to me again. I was never gonna get rejected. I was never going to lose, especially in a way that felt kind of unfair. If you fast forward 25 years, my counselor would call that an internal vow. That experience at 15 taught me something. And I didn't want to feel that pain, and I didn't want to feel that rejection, and I never wanted to feel the hurt again. So for 25 years, I lived out of that internal vow. I lived out of that anger. I lived out of that determination. I decided it would never happen to me again. You can get a lot accomplished living out of anger and determination. I got married, had some children out of that. Well, I wasn't angry the whole time, but you know what I mean. I built a pretty good career. I got a few degrees. The whole time, though, just being angry and really, really determined. It's kind of funny, actually, that sometimes that type A kind of thing that we celebrate isn't really always healthy. I came across as really type A, and I am, but it was on steroids. Because a type A personality who refuses to lose, who does whatever it takes to avoid failure, that's a pretty dangerous person. I left a wake of bodies in my successes. Here's what I think we all need to recognize. There are so many other ways to deal with loss. And probably the best way to figure out how to deal with it is to look at a story, a narrative from Scripture in the book of John. John wrote about this story that he experienced personally. John was one of the disciples, and so everywhere that Jesus went, John went with him. There's this incredible story. If you're a Christian, you've probably heard it before. It's about a guy named Lazarus. Jesus was really good friends with Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha. Jesus is a little ways away, and he hears that Lazarus is sick. Now, this is a pretty big deal because Jesus really loves this guy, and he doesn't really want him to be sick. And in fact, Jesus knows he's dying, and he does die. But when he finds out, he doesn't rush back. Well, let me kind of pick up that story. This is in John chapter 11. We're going to begin in verse 5 if you want to follow along. Here's what John wrote about the story. He says, "Now Jesus loved Mary and her sister Martha and Lazarus. So when he had learned Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was." This is kind of funny, right? "For 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, 'Let's go back to Judea.'" I won't tell you the whole thing, but it's so funny. You should read it for yourself. There's this really fun interaction between Jesus and the disciples because you see, the last time they were in Judea, the last time they were there, they were almost killed. They were almost executed. And so they kind of fled from Judea. And so when Jesus says, "Let's go back to Judea," he says that Lazarus has fallen asleep. His disciples go, "Well, if he's asleep, maybe he'll just wake back up and we can stay here." And Jesus goes, "Okay, he's not asleep, he's actually dead." And one of the disciples goes, "Well, I guess we'll go die along with him." So they get up and they all go back to the house of Lazarus. Of course, when they get there, it's been a few more days. Now, 4 days have passed and Lazarus is dead. He's been buried. The stone of the tomb has been rolled in front. And everybody is so sad. They're weeping, they're mourning. Crowds have gathered of the people who love Mary, Martha, and of course, Lazarus. Well, Jesus shows up. Story picks up. Here's what John says. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, which we do this all the time when we're sad as well. We fall at the feet of Jesus. Even if you don't believe in Jesus, you find yourself praying and hoping that maybe he'll come through. So she falls at Jesus' feet and she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and he was troubled. And he asked a question. He says, "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved Lazarus." Now, as the story goes, Jesus goes to the tomb and he asks them to roll the stone away. And they all look back and they say, but Lord, his body will stink. It's been 4 days. And so they roll the tomb away, the stone away from the tomb. And Jesus stands there. It's so fun. He prays. And in this moment, he basically says, "God, you know what I need to do. You know what I want you to do. I know you're going to do it. I'm just praying to you so that people will understand that you and I are really connected and that it's through your power that we're about to do this." It's this really funny prayer. At the end of the prayer, Jesus leans into the front of the tomb. And maybe you remember what he says. He says, Lazarus, come out." And then the dead man came out. His hands and his feet were wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth was around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off these grave clothes and let him go." And he did. Lazarus back to life. If you're a Christian, no doubt, you have heard that story multiple times. And we focus on the end of the story, and I mean, rightfully so. When someone comes back to life, that is worth paying attention to. And that's why we always focus on Lazarus. But in this story, there's something that happens in the very middle of it that is so critical for us to understand. It's in verse 35, where it just says that Jesus wept. Jesus wept. This is so important. What's so important about this moment is that Jesus knew exactly what he was going to do. He knew that he was about to raise one of his best, closest friends back to life. He knew that all the weeping didn't need to continue. He knew all that. But instead instead of blowing past all of it, he decided to engage in it. See, what Jesus actually chose to feel here was grief. Jesus felt, he allowed himself to grieve. And he didn't just blow past that feeling of loss. He kind of allowed himself to sit in the middle of that loss. Jesus allowed himself to feel the pain and the sadness of loss. And that's really important for us to understand. And here's the thing about grief though, right? Unfortunately, we've been led to associate grief with death, kind of like we see here with Lazarus and Jesus. And we've all experienced a death of some kind, a friend, a loved one, and we grieved that death. We were told to do that. We knew to do that. But what we don't actually understand, at least a lot of us, I know I haven't, is that grief isn't just about death. Grief is actually about loss. What we're actually grieving is the loss associated with the death. And this is important to know. Every loss is a death. Every single loss that we experience is a kind of death. Now, of course, a physical death is absolutely a loss. That's the one that we're most familiar with. But every single loss is a death. And you know what happens when there's a death, right? We bury it. Every loss is a death, and every death eventually gets buried. Every single death gets buried. Now here's why this is so important. Because when we experience a loss, eventually that loss, that death is gonna be buried. And we have an option to grieve it. And if we can grieve the loss before we bury it, we can bury it dead. And when we bury a loss dead, it rests in peace. Of course, the other side of it is that we don't grieve it. And that's typically what we do. We don't know we're supposed to. So we experience a loss, but we don't know to grieve it. And so we have these ungrieved losses. But ungrieved losses are really dangerous. Ungrieved losses are buried alive. And if horror movies have taught us anything that's buried alive, when it comes back, it's way meaner and way angrier. And this is the same thing with ungrieved losses. That ungrieved loss that we're experiencing is a death that we bury. But if we don't grieve it, it gets buried alive and it leaves it without any peace. And it leaves us without any peace. Worse, it doesn't stay in the grave. It comes back out and it follows us and it haunts us. And it doesn't just haunt us in the moment, it haunts us for a long time, maybe 25 years long, like it did me. That's the danger of ungrieved losses. It affects every aspect of our life. It makes everything more complicated. And when you try to pinpoint where the complication and frustration is coming from, it's so hard to know because it was an ungrieved loss in your past. See, only ungrieved losses only losses that are grieved can actually rest in peace. It's so important. Only losses that are grieved can rest in peace. But you see, we don't really know that. And if there's ever been a moment to learn it, it is now. Because as we speak in this pandemic season, we are experiencing more losses than maybe ever in our life combined. Think about how many different kinds of things we have lost over the past few months. Here's just a few of those things. We've lost jobs. All of us have lost 401ks, at least to some extent. But we've lost vacations, graduation ceremonies. Some of you have lost summer camps, 5th grade school walks. Did you know that at the end of 5th grade, those children get to walk around the school? It's like a graduation ceremony. Their last time walking the schools of their elementary. They haven't been able to do that. They lost that. Birthday parties, friendships, dance recitals. And this is why this list is so important. Because when we think about grief and we think about loss, we typically think about death. We don't think about these kinds of things. But every single loss is a death, which means every single loss will eventually be buried. And we have a choice to grieve these losses and allow them to be buried dead and rest in peace, or We can do what we typically do when we experience loss. We try to minimize it or we try to medicate it. But that's actually our temptation when we experience a loss. We medicate losses because medicating a loss numbs the pain, whether it's a substance or an alcohol or binge eating or, in my case, an internal vow. But those are just examples of how we medicate to numb the loss. But you know as well as I do that when you numb the pain of loss, the loss doesn't go away. The feeling in the moment goes away, but it's just temporary because you can't stay numb forever. And the pain just keeps coming back. You know, there are other temptation with all of these losses is just to minimize it, to say it doesn't really matter. It's not really a big deal. And listen, I get it. I mean, when I look at this list, I think, well, yeah, job, that's a big deal. 401k, it's kind of a big deal. But I mean, summer camp, I mean, there's gonna be another summer. I mean, it's just one summer, right? I mean, a dance recital, I mean, there's a bunch more of those. So okay, you missed one, what's the big deal? It's such a big deal because every loss matters, because every loss is gonna be buried. And the ones that we grieve, we can bury dead and they can rest in peace. But if we don't grieve the loss, it's still gonna get buried. It's just gonna be buried alive and it's gonna come back and it's gonna haunt us in our future. It's gonna follow us everywhere we go. It's gonna affect every part of our life. The reason I know that's true is because that's exactly what my experience was. When I was 15, no one told me that my reaction to being cut from the JV basketball team was to grieve that loss. No one told me to grieve that loss. They actually told me a lot of the opposite. It doesn't matter, you can play rec ball, it's not a big deal. One day you'll be 45 and you won't even care about JV basketball. And in some respects, I get it, that's kind of true, but in a very real way, it's also not true. Because at 15, basketball was the most important thing to me, and I lost it. But I didn't know I was supposed to grieve it, so I buried it. But it got buried alive. And listen, for 25 years, I became really competitive, kinda angry, super determined, all because of an unhealthy loss that I never knew I was supposed to grieve. And I get the hesitation. We don't wanna grieve stuff. We hate grieving stuff. And the reason we don't wanna grieve is because we don't wanna feel that emotion. We like to keep emotion somewhere over there, not in here. But we really don't have much of a choice when you think about it. When we experience a loss, no matter how big it is, whether it feels significant to you or even if it feels like it shouldn't be, it is. And when we experience a loss, we really only have two choices. We can grieve it, we can allow ourselves to feel it, to experience it, and to eventually move past it. Or we can choose not to. But here's the promise, and I'm just telling you this from my own personal experience. If you don't grieve loss now, it will come back and create grief for you later. It's a guarantee. You can either grieve the loss now, or you can medicate it or minimize it and ignore it, but it won't go away. And if you grieve it now, you can bury it dead and it will rest in peace. But if you don't grieve it, those ungrieved losses are gonna come back and they are gonna create incredible grief for you later. And the people around you too. See, your present situation, these present losses, they really can't become a part of your past if they continue to persist in your future. Nothing in our past is really in our past if it's still present with us today. And if these losses that we're racking up, if we really do want them to become a part of a story that we tell from our past, the only way for that to happen is for us to choose to start grieving them now. So what does it look like to grieve a loss? Well, it's not that complicated. It's to acknowledge that it matters. It's to name it as a loss, call it by name, talk about it, find people who have experienced grief before, engage with them in it. This is the hard part, but allow yourself to feel the pain, to feel the sadness. And when you begin to feel it, I know the temptation, you're gonna wanna minimize it, you're gonna wanna medicate that in some way, but don't do that. Because when you do it, it doesn't allow the grief to actually go on the journey, and it doesn't allow it to become something that you can bury in peace. It took me a long time to learn that lesson. Gosh, if I could take you back during those 25 years, so many things I missed out on because I was afraid of failure. So many things I never tried because I wasn't sure I could win. Man, I remember being at the beach one time. I'd never been on a paddleboard. And my wife said, hey, why don't you rent a paddleboard and you can go out in the Gulf, it'll be so fun. I went and checked on it. It was, I can't remember, $50. I came back and she said, how much is it? I said, it's $50. She goes, oh, well, that's fine. We should do it. And I said, nah, $50 is a lot of money for paddleboarding. You know the real reason I didn't paddleboard? Because I had made an internal vow. I didn't want to fail at paddleboarding. I don't even know if you can fail at paddleboarding, but this is how big of a deal ungrieved losses can be. I don't want that to be your story. I don't want 2020 to be the year that you accumulated loss and didn't know what to do with it. And so you medicated it and you minimized it and you made these internal vows that are gonna haunt you for decades to come. Let's just not do that. Let's grieve the losses, every single one of them, so that we can bury them dead and so that they can rest in peace. If you want to actually live free from your past, you have to grieve the losses. And it's never fun to grieve. But can I tell you what's way less fun? Living out of an ungrieved loss. And you don't want to do that. Let's pray for a second. Heavenly Father, gosh, thank you that you allowed Jesus to do what he did. I mean, in a way, it doesn't make sense because, he knew what was going to happen. He knew that Lazarus was going to come back to life, but instead of just moving to that, he decided to sit in the pain and in the sadness, which is so beautiful and wonderful to know. And here's why, because it teaches us that we need to do it. It also teaches us that you know what we feel when we do it. So when we grieve, we're not just grieving alone, you're grieving with us because you know what it feels like. So God, just give us the wisdom to understand all the different losses that we've experienced. If we've minimized any from our past, just bring those back up. It seems weird to pray that, but I pray you bring it back to our minds and our hearts so we can grieve those things from the past too, so that we can move past them, so they don't bother us and haunt us for the rest of our lives. God, thank you for being the kind of God that resurrects our lives and that allows us, when we experience loss, to find hope and to find peace. And thank you that even though grief is challenging, that we don't have to go through it alone. And on the other side of that journey is freedom and peace. Jesus, we love you so much. Thank you for displaying this for us in such a powerful way. And we pray this in your name.
Before he spoke creation, the God of heaven knew our names. Formed in his reflection, we are his glory on display. And his heart is good, he is always kind. With a cross he proved he is on my side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. No matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. We are the Lord's and he will never forsake his own. Oh, we are the sons, we are the daughters of God. His love he lavished on us, and called us children of the King. And in his loving kindness, he chose the lowly and the weak. And his heart is good, he is always kind. With the cross he proves he is on my side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. No matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. We are the Lord's and he will never forsake his own. Oh, we are the sons, we are the daughters of God. When the lies speak louder than the truth, remind me that I belong to you. And when I can't see past the dark of night, remind me you're always by my side. And when the lies speak louder than the truth, remind me that I belong to you. And when I can't see past the dark of night, remind me you're always by my side. You're by my side. We are the sons, we are the daughters of God. No matter where we go, we're close to the Father's heart. And though we stumble, he will not let us fall. We are the Lord's and he will never forsake his own. Oh, we are the sons, we are the daughters of God. Yes, we are. We are.
God, thank you so much for being a God who is with us, who cares for us. Thank you for being a God who gives us an identity in you, and that we can come to you and know that you care about our burdens, about our needs, about the things that are grieving us. Thank you so much for this message from Gavin. And God, I pray that you would give us the wisdom and the courage to know how to apply this in our lives this week, and to allow you to make a difference in the way that we love each other. And we just ask, God, that you would give us the strength to love the world around us the way that you would have us love, and the way that you've loved us. Thank you so much, God, for that love. Amen. Guys, thank you so much for being here today, for joining us online. And if you enjoyed this message, if this was helpful for you, if this message offered you some hope, I would love it if you would share it with a friend. Send them an email or a text with a link to this video. Like this video, that helps us out a lot. And then if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you get notified when we post new content. And remember that we have content on this channel for kids, preschoolers, elementary students, middle school students, and high school students, because we want your entire family to be growing during this season as well. And we are monitoring the situation closely. We're looking at what's happening here locally with COVID cases and hospitalizations and all of that. But we are also trying to make plans to get started around the time that school gets started as well. And we would love for you to be a part of that. If you feel safe doing that, we want you to join us at Liberty Pines. We'll be announcing a date soon. If you're able to do that and you're feeling well, please join us on Sunday mornings at Liberty Pines. And if you would like to help us, we are putting together a team to help broadcast what we do at Liberty Pines live on Sunday morning, because we recognize that for a lot of people, online is still going to be a better option, at least for a while to come. And so we want that to be a great experience for you if you're watching online. And the best way that we can do that is to have a volunteer team that is running cameras and running audio and making sure that everything that you see at home looks great and sounds great. So if you're interested in being a part of that team, please let Kevin or any of the rest of us on staff know that you want to help. You don't have to be an expert in any of that. We will teach you, but we do need some people who are willing to be available. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great week. We'll see you back here next Sunday at Access Church Online.